Hi. Good evening and welcome to Seven Stories Up, Eric LaRocca with Chuck Wendig. At dark, I become loathsome. We are delighted to have you all joining us tonight at the Stavros Niarchos Foundation Library. My name is Allison Nellis, and I'm a supervising librarian of programming and outreach here at SNFL. Before we begin, I'd like to thank the Stavros Niarchos Foundation for making programs like this evening's conversation possible. I'd like to encourage you to visit the New York Public Library's website and take a look at upcoming programs just like this one. We have an excellent lineup this season featuring new nonfiction, music, and more, and we would love for you to join us in this space again. And it is now my pleasure to introduce tonight's speakers. Eric LaRocca is a two-time Bram Stoker Award finalist and Splatterpunk Award winner, named by Esquire as one of the writers shaping horror's next golden age, and praised by Locus as one of the strongest and most unique voices in contemporary horror. LaRocca's most notable works include Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke, Everything the Dark Eats, The Tree Grew Because I Bled There, Collected Stories, and You've Lost a Lot of Blood. His new novel, At Dark I Become Loathsome, will be published in January 2025. The book has already been optioned for film by The Walking Dead star Norman Reedus. He currently resides in Boston with his partner, and for more information, please visit ericlarocca.com. Chuck Wendig is the New York Times bestseller author of The Book of Accidents, Black River Orchid, and the duology of Wanderers Wayward, plus over 24 other books for adults and young adults. A finalist for the Astounding Award and an alum of the Sundance Screenwriters Lab, he has also written comics, games, and for film and television. He is known for his popular blog, Terrible Minds, and books about writing such as Damn Fine Story. He lives in Bucks County, Pennsylvania with his family, and it is now my pleasure to introduce tonight's guests.
What's happening? This is an honor, by the way.
An honor for me.
Well, thank you. I have loved Eric's work, and we're going to start right off at the beginning, just right from sort of where I came into it. Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke. First of all, phenomenal title.
Thank you.
I think all of your titles are so amazing. I think that one especially embodies almost like what every horror book should be. Every horror story should be like Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke. I was like, yes, that's that beautiful escalation. It's right there in the title. So that's the first thing I want to ask you is how do you come up with such fantastic titles? Like Bentley Little's title is like The Church.
Yeah.
But yours
the
have
noun.
The noun.
Yeah.
Yours have this elaborate narrative in just the title.
I've always loved that. I've always loved really evocative, Baroque, poetic titles. I'm a big fan of like Giallo films from like the 70s and 80s. So like I love films like All the Colors of the Dark and What Have You Done to Solange and A Blade in the Dark. Like, these really evocative and just arresting titles.
Yeah.
And
they feel like confessions. They feel like accusations.
Yeah,
They're great. Yeah,
they do. Yeah, they feel like, just something that you would pick out of like a book from like Poe or something, and just really beautiful and poetic. And I've always loved that. So I keep like in my notes app on my phone like just phrases that I want to use for titles.
Sure.
But I'm finding now as I'm like moving on to other presses, like bigger presses, they're a little more interested in like the one-word titles as
they
opposed.
like a conservative title.
They like a conservative title.
Yeah.
So I have a book coming out with Saga Press next year or the year after, and it's just a one-word title.
Oh.
So I'm interested to like see how the readers react to like me switching it up. And
I know. You should have like a secondary title that has other words secretly ghosted. Cause like we know it by the real title.
Well, I think what I'm gonna do is it's gonna be like the one-word title, and then it's gonna be or my actual title.
That's it. That's perfect. Yeah.
So I think that's a good way of like appeasing what I love to do.
True LaRocca fans.
Yeah.
They get it.
Yeah, exactly.
So that book, that novella, came kind of out of nowhere for the rest of us, right? And I'm not for you, obviously, but one day you were like transcendent.
I
You were
appeared.
just resplendent, and here was this amazing novella, and it did, I think, really well for you. The great title, beautiful title, beautiful cover, amazing story. What was that like for you? Because it feels like, again, you just sort of became you.
It really was like the definition of overnight success, to be honest. Like it's crazy because I had been writing for so long prior to that overnight success.
Sure.
I had been writing since I was like 7 or 8.
Okay.
You know, just writing short stories, mimicking like the classic monster movies that I loved to watch as a kid. And that book really just completely changed my life in a lot of ways. Like,
Yeah.
it opened so many doors for me. People, like directors and editors, just came out from everywhere and
Yeah.
were just so interested in me and my vision and what, you know, I was bringing to the table of horror.
Yeah.
And it was such an amazing experience, but it was also really difficult to be like under that microscope.
Sure.
I was like 28, 29, so a couple years ago, and you know, to be under that kind of glare in the public light, it wasn't something I was really used to, and I certainly didn't expect it for that book. Like, I look back at that book, and it's a great book. I'm really proud of it.
Yeah.
But I never thought that would be the book that everybody would talk about
Yeah.
and would continue to talk about.
It was, and you did something there that clicked, that connected with people.
I think, and you know, someone asked me recently, like, what do you think it was about that book that really made people connect with it? And I think it was just like a lightning in a bottle sort of moment. Like, you had the provocative title, you had that arresting cover art by Kim Jacobson, who's this like surrealist painter from Sweden.
Yeah.
And then you had a story about people not communicating effectively online.
Yeah.
In
It was very zeitgeist.
very zeitgeist.
Yeah.
And it came out like at the height of the COVID pandemic.
Yeah.
And I feel like people really needed a story like that at that time,
Yes.
you know?
And it was short and punchy and impactful. Sure.
Yeah. I'm proud of it. I
Yeah.
look back at it, and you know, there have been times where I'm like, fuck, like, why did I write that book? Because I'm like stuck with it now.
Yeah.
But it's you know, I am proud of it. And it changed my life in so many ways, and I met so many people. Like, I met you, I met Paul Tremblay, I met Chris
Great.
Golden.
Yeah.
You know, just like these amazing luminaries of horror.
Yeah, amazing people. And you're deservedly right up there. And that's the thing. It's not like this book came out and was like your one-hit wonder.
Right.
And we'll talk a little bit about what comes after that. But then you're saying, so like 7, 8 years old, you were writing.
Yes.
Okay, so and you were writing kind of horror-ish even then?
I was always horror.
Were you
yeah, I
really?
was always just attracted to like the macabre and the dark. And my parents saw that, and they were like, "What the fuck is wrong with this kid?" But
Yeah. Oh no.
yeah, my dad mostly. But you know, he is great. But my mom really saw this like attraction I had to like darkness, and really encouraged me to explore like the older, more poetic forms of horror, like the Universal monster movies from like the 30s and 40s. So like House of Frankenstein, House of Dracula with you know, John Carradine and Bela Lugosi or Boris Karloff. So I watched like all of those films, and you know, they didn't really want me watching like the more kind of splattery films in the early 2000s, which I mean, I love now. But like at that age, you know, like 7 or 8, they were like, I don't really want my kid watching that. Right. So I kind of did like a deep dive in horror just growing up, and I kind of studied the genre from a really young age, and you know, graduated from different level to level.
Yeah.
And it really was when I discovered Clive Barker that everything sort of changed for me.
That shifted.
And it's like my third eye just like completely opened and
never shut.
Never shut.
Yeah.
And I mean, like the Books of Blood really like just were a game changer for me, and it really showed me that you can be like just unapologetically grotesque and brutal and unflinching with your horror.
Yes, but beautiful.
But
at
beautiful
the
and
same
poetic.
time, yeah.
Yeah.
So what is it that appealed to you with horror, both as a kid and even now? And then beyond that, do you think that there's like a greater function of horror? Does it do something, or does that not matter?
I think horror is intensely cathartic.
Yeah.
I think it's a very cathartic genre. I mean, Haley Piper says this in interviews a lot, but horror is the genre of honesty. And it's such an honest genre because it really forces us to just stare unblinkingly at the trauma and the horror and the brutality. you know, you get that with horror that you don't really get in a lot of other genres. So I think horror is very cathartic. It's cathartic for me to write. It feels like, you know, a purging of a lot of grotesquerie, a
Sure.
lot of like internal like pollution, I feel.
Yeah.
I don't know. Every time I sit down to write like a really horrific scene, I always feel better
Yeah,
after
it
having
does.
written it.
Yeah.
You know,
Is that why horror writers are some of the nicest people
I
around?
think
Because they really
so.
are. It's a very nice, supportive community.
Well, it's interesting because, you know, my boyfriend, he doesn't really like horror.
Yeah.
And he has like these awful nightmares that he tells me about. And he doesn't really consume horror
Yeah.
at all. And then me, I'm like watching like a slasher movie while I'm going to sleep.
Yeah.
And, you know, someone's getting like decapitated and I'm just like going to bed. And I don't have nightmares.
Yeah, I don't either.
I
Yeah, my
really don't
wife
have
also does not
nightmares.
watch horror and has nightmares. Like,
Yeah.
just watch horror.
Yeah. But I think it's like that purging
Yeah.
of the darkness.
It does. Yeah, I think there's this. It's a cleansing, like you say, a catharsis. It's going with that Haley Piper quote about horror is always honest. I do think the one thing that horror isn't always, and it's not a judgment on, is it's not always empathetic. I
Mhm.
do think your work is deeply, deeply empathetic. You
Thank
have
you.
every piece feels like a strong character study, but that character study, you know, you're not just telling me sort of plot like it's a bunch of guys go into a town and there's evil and they have to fight it. It's, I mean, there's this intense. I like to think of your work as a descent. There feels like a very strong descent into these characters, not just they're descending and you're descending with them. And I think there's just an intense empathy. Do you intend for that? Do you feel connected to the work in that sort of way? Because it just feels like there's this emotional tether to the work in a way that there's not always. Some horror can be quite, and I don't always hate this, but it can be quite mean about its characters.
Right.
And I don't feel like you are. Even the most grotesque, even the worst possible characters, I feel like you're reaching out.
I look
and
at them
understanding
with
them.
with like love a little bit.
Yeah.
I feel like in a lot of ways, like I'm I don't want to judge my characters ever.
That's exactly it.
I don't want to like sneer at them or look
Right.
down at them.
Right.
And I think, you know, in the book that we're going to be talking about tonight, At Dark I Become Loathsome, the main character Ashley is very inward, like so much self-loathing,
Yes.
very very pitiable.
But I don't feel like you participate in that.
No,
Which is interesting.
Yeah, I don't want to.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to guide the reader into thinking those things. I'd much rather them come to their own conclusions
Yeah.
based on what I'm presenting to them.
Sure.
So for me, I think the whole point of that book is that, you know, even though we have these like vile, monstrous thoughts, these like intrusive thoughts,
Yeah.
it doesn't make us a terrible person.
Right. Right.
And I feel like that's the crux
Yeah.
of the book in general.
Yes, there's a powerful dance in that book with grief and guilt,
Yes.
and what that means for Ashley in that book.
Right.
And then the sort of the layered narrative. So actually, let's talk about that book. It's a phenomenal book. Congratulations on it.
you.
Came out Tuesday. I think every story has a story. So where does this come from for you?
Yeah, so this book really originated from an article that I read, and I can't recall if it was Vice or ID, but basically the premise of the book is a grieving widower sets up this like makeshift death ritual. He buries people alive for 30 minutes to give them like a transformative rebirth experience. And I had come across this article in Vice or ID about this program in, I believe it was like Asia, that did this similar thing. That like they would go through like a whole like death ritual.
Yeah.
And would bury people alive for this like transformative rebirth. And I thought it was fascinating, and I thought that would be a really interesting backdrop for a character.
Yeah.
You know, and I really wanted this to be like a character study. At first, I thought it was going to be a film because I went to school for writing for film and television.
Right.
So I had this idea when I was like in grad school, like 5-6 years ago, and I think I pitched it at one point to one of my teachers, and she was like, this is just too fucking bleak for us. This is
Yeah.
just too bleak, too dark.
Sure, but in a book form.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so a little too much for, you know, a screenplay at like, you know, an MFA program. But, you know, I held on to the idea. And then it really was when Norman Reedus's agent reached out to me, which was
Yeah.
such a surreal experience.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Norman Reedus from The Walking Dead.
From The Walking
Yeah.
Dead, yeah. I got an email one day on my website from this person that says like, yeah, I'm connected with Norman Reedus, like I'm his agent. I'm like, yeah, right.
Sure.
And
We get a lot of emails.
yeah,
there.
right. And he was just like, you know, Norman's like a really big fan of your work and would love to collaborate with you on something and would love to like commission you to write a
And
novel.
it wasn't like, and you just give us $500 and we'll. Yeah.
Right,
That's
right.
that's amazing.
Right. Yeah, it was incredible. So I forwarded it to my manager, and I was like, you know, do you mind looking into this? So he sent, you know, I didn't think anything was going to happen with it. And then a couple days later, he wrote back and was like, yeah, like Norman's a big fan and would love to, you know, connect with you and make, you know, commission you to write this novel. And it felt almost like I was like an artist back in like the Renaissance period.
He was your De Medici.
Yeah, he really was.
Your
like,
patron.
Yeah, he was like my patron. Like I felt like I was creating something like a mural in like some church or whatever.
That's great. So what's that? I mean, what was that process like? I mean, in terms of, was there oversight? Is there you know, how does that begin and occur?
Yeah, so I mean, basically, once he reached out, I went back to my agent and I was like, "This is awesome!" Like, we did like the happy dance, and you know, I just kind of went through the ideas that I had like in my arsenal, and that's why like I always think it's so important for writers to have like a portfolio of like outlined concepts just ready to go, because you never know who's going to reach out and ask you like, what else you got? You know, and this is what happened to me, and it's happened to me like quite a few times. So, and I've always been prepared. I've always been ready. So that, you know, it was great experience to have like the project kind of already outlined. But like I had this idea, like I said, from grad school, and I was like, you know, I think this would be a really great concept for him. I could really see, you know, not that I expect Norman to star in this adaptation, but I feel like he would be perfect for the main character of Ashley. He has that like sensitivity, but also that like brutality. You know, he looks like someone who's like broken, like someone
he's been through some shit.
He's been through some shit.
Yeah.
Like he looks like he's been traumatized. So you know, I went with my agent and I pitched to Blackstone, and I was like, they're never gonna go for this. Like, they're not gonna go for it because it was like too dark. It was too like queer, too whatever. And they surprisingly to me, they accepted it, and I just started writing it and worked on it for like a year or so, maybe a little under, and sent it to them. And then Blackstone's process is a little different than some other big publishers in that they like the acquiring editor that like brings your book into the fold isn't the one that works on the novel.
Oh,
with you.
interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So the editor that they hire is like a freelance editor. So I worked with Melissa Ann Singer, who was the senior editor at Tor for many, many years.
Sure.
She worked with like Daniel Krauss and Robert Bloch even.
Wow.
She's incredible. So she made the book so much better. I mean, the first draft, I mean, like anything, it's never perfect. And she really brought out like the best parts of what I was working with in that story, and really like helped me define Ashley's character more, really helped me get into like the nuance of what I was trying to say. And I mean, that's what a good editor does, is like brings that fresh perspective. And so I mean, once she had kind of the book and we were working on it together, then it kind of went back to Blackstone, and Norman optioned it, and you know, it took a while for that news to break, and then finally the news came out, and you know, it's been a really lovely journey, honestly. Partnering with Blackstone has been a great honor.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Was the process of getting it, like, you know, okay, so let's say in this book, it's very much about the rite that Ashley brings this death rite. Do you have your own rituals, both in the writing and in surrounding books? Are you superstitious with the writing? Is there a process involved, a very specific process, or are you is everything different? Every book different?
I mean, I feel like you find the rhythm for each and every book depending on what the book requires.
Sure.
Like I've noticed, I'll work on a certain book I'll be like in a good rhythm at like a certain part of the afternoon.
Sure.
Okay, I'm going to work on this project like only like maybe during the afternoon. And I am like a little superstitious like that.
Okay, yeah.
You know, and I'm not someone that really likes to have music on while
I don't either.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I just can't
I can't do it.
I can't do it. And people say I'm weird for that. Because,
Same.
Yeah.
Same. We are kin in this. Yeah.
It's like, that's what you think is weird about me?
You're like, have you read any of the books?
Yeah.
It's all in there.
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess I am like a little superstitious in that like everything kind of has to be like a certain way.
Yeah.
And I really want like my surroundings to be pleasant and peaceful.
Sure. Are you a person who can write in public?
No.
I can't either.
No. Yeah. I need it quiet. I need privacy.
Yeah.
I really, I don't function well like writing, and I've tried it like once or twice, and it's always been like a disaster.
Yeah, it's been a disaster every time I've tried.
Yeah. So I guess I am like kind of superstitious when it comes to writing, but I mean, like I said, like you know, I feel like each book finds its own rhythm.
It does.
Yes. And I heard Josh Mallerman say that in an interview one time. Like, you know, it really depends on what the book requires and what the book is speaking to you about. And,
right.
You know, so I've kind of taken that advice and, you know, run with it.
Yeah, I definitely feel like when you enter a book and when you exit a book, you're a different writer.
Yeah.
And then when you go to edit the book, you're a different writer.
You're a totally different
You're
writer.
a totally different person, so you bring different things to it.
And I feel like I'm a different person now than I was when I first wrote this book.
Right.
So it feels so weird to be up here talking about a book that I wrote like 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, it's weird. The process takes so much time.
Yeah.
And, you know, from inception to shelf time.
Right. Yeah.
Was the edit tricky? Did it change much in the edit? Like, what was the editing process in the book like?
The editing process was great. I mean, Melissa and I got along really well. The only kind of tricky spot was there were a few elements in the book that shocking were very graphic, and you know, the publisher kind of recommended, like, I think we should kind of trim these sections and maybe not you know, do infant genital mutilation and stuff like that.
Not this time.
Yeah. So
that's book 2.
Yeah. So you know, it just was the smart move to make at the time, and you know, I still stand by the work. And,
yeah, of course.
I'm glad that I listened to those notes. And you know, working in like the smaller presses, you kind of get your own way.
Yeah.
Like you kind of you call the shots a little bit more.
Right.
But like working with like a bigger press, you really have to like collaborate more and be like a little bit more flexible. But it's also the trick of like maintaining the vision, like what we were talking about kind of earlier before we started. Is just like, you know, maintaining that vision and really staying true to your art, but also like there's a moment of like the meeting of everything where everything comes together, and it's like the publicity, the marketing, the vision, the art, the artistry.
Yes.
You know, it all has to kind of work cohesively together.
Yeah, and I think all of that stuff can still not only be
together.
the vision, but enhance the vision.
Right.
You just got to help steer that too, sometime from the back of the ship.
Right.
Yeah,
absolutely. Exactly.
And I do think that we should not do infant genital mutilation. Is an Eric LaRocca title.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's a perfect title.
It's a perfect
for me.
title. So
yeah.
I look forward to that coming out in 2020, 2040.
Right. Yeah.
You write a lot, Eric.
I do, yeah.
You there are so many books, novellas, short stories. This is your now second novel. Published novel.
Yes.
And we'll talk about what's coming up next. But did you feel like you had more of an affinity for the short form and the novella, or was that just a strategy, just because you knew you could produce a lot of that quickly? Was novels always the goal? Do you like that more? That's a lot of questions, but
yeah, I mean, novels are kind of where the industry, like where it exists.
Sure.
You know, you kind of really need to have a novel to like get an agent, to get a manager, to get published, to get like the big 5 deal or
Yeah.
whatever. That being said, like I feel more at home in the novella short story space. And I think I always will feel
Yeah.
at home in that space, like no matter how many novels I write. And I've written a few, like many, many novels now that I'm just kind of sitting on and
Right.
waiting for them to come out over the next couple of years.
Yeah.
But you know, that being said, like I do really appreciate the art form of writing a novel.
Yeah.
I think it's its own kind of beast. It's very separate from
Sure.
writing a novella, writing a short story. But yeah, I feel more at home writing like the shorter pieces, only because that's kind of where I started. And
Yeah.
you know, I feel like a novella or like a short story is almost kind of like a complex like bird's nest, whereas like if you take one piece away, like the whole structural integrity kind
Yeah.
of falls apart. So it's like it's specific how like things are placed together.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that. And I suppose like novels, it's kind of the same way, but
It's just a bigger nest.
It's a
and
bigger
more
nest.
unruly
yeah, yeah,
complex of nests.
yeah.
Do you? I mean, it feels like a boring question, but I kind of want to know: do you plot, or is this a thing you vibe your way through it?
No, I outline.
You outline.
Yeah, and it was really, you know, going to grad school that really kind of drilled that into me, where
Yeah.
it was like, you really need to, at least for me, that's what works for me. I always say, like, you know, if it's everyone kind of has their own journey and their own way of doing art, and if you're more of like a pantser or like a plotter,
Right.
it doesn't matter as long as you get the words on the page and type the end at the end of the manuscript, like you're good.
Sure. However you get there.
Yeah.
In whatever
so
crude and brutal way it is.
I'm definitely like more of a plotter,
Yeah.
you know, someone who really plans what.
Sure.
But that's not to say that I don't leave the door open for those organic moments
Yeah.
of
Sometimes get off the highway.
surprises.
Yeah.
You know, because I'm interested in that, and sometimes it surprises me, and sometimes I'm like, all right, like let's go down this road and see where it leads.
Right. Has anything ever changed in a fundamental way? Has an ending ever changed in the story separate from an outline?
Yeah, a couple
Yeah.
times it's
Yeah.
changed. Yeah, it's definitely changed in a few pieces I've written. Not for this book, for Loathsome. I kind of always knew that it was going to end this specific way, and I'm obviously not going to like spoil it or anything. But for me, you know, having that outline is really important, and
Yeah.
having like the structure of it there, like the bones,
Yes.
and then just adding like the flesh and the organs eventually
Sure.
after. It's
Sure.
like
Staple
you know,
gunning them. Yeah.
right, yeah, exactly.
So with this book, do you actually, within general, with your work, do you ever feel like you're trying to say something? Do you ever think about things as lofty as theme or messaging, not in a preachy way? Are you trying to get something across, or is this just whatever that is, it is, and you don't control that?
Yeah, I mean, I try not to be too didactic
Yeah.
when it comes to like writing, and you know, I don't want to be preachy or
Sure.
you know, make people feel a certain way. Like, you know,
Right.
I obviously want people to have like an intense reaction to my work, no matter what. For me, art is supposed to be challenging and you know,
Yeah.
raw and uncomfortable.
Yes.
And I want to be that. But that being said, you as an artist don't get to be that level of where you control how people
Right.
view
Right. How they respond.
how
to
they
it. Yeah.
respond to your work.
Right.
So I'm thinking of how people might react a little
Yeah.
bit when I'm creating, but I know at the end of the day I can't control that.
Sure. Like, because I keep thinking the guilt and grief angle of this is I adore it. I feel like so many stories approach grief in a shallow way, as if grief is its own thing and doesn't lead to other stuff, as if that's sort of the end of that road and you must overcome grief and be good.
Right.
But I feel like the guilt that goes implicit with that grief, the responsibility, the fallout, the feelings in the wake of that grief, which this is very much about that, who you are in the wake of that grief. And that's what I'm wondering, like, is that a thing you think about going into it? Are you thinking about these high-minded things, or are you just like kind of rooted purely in the character and seeing where they go?
I'm interested in the character
Yeah.
and seeing like how they react to
That
the
situation,
fucked up
yeah.
things
The
I
fucked
put
up
them
thing.
in.
Yeah.
And because, you know,
Yeah.
a lot of my, pretty much all of my books are about broken people
Yeah.
hurting other people.
Sure.
Or being hurt by other hurt people.
Yes.
And I'm just interested in that in the way kind of humanity is, and just like
Sure.
the suffering and the brutality and the viciousness of like
Yes.
us interacting with one another.
Yeah.
So for me, I'm more interested in like a character angle.
Sure.
I'm not really going into it like thinking like these like high-minded things. I'm just really interested in like the story and like how a character is going to react. And yeah, for this piece especially, it feels like a more like thoughtful character study. Like
Yeah,
you know,
it
in a
is.
lot of ways.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So every time my experience is every time I open my computer, there is Eric announcing a new deal. You have so much coming up, and I feel like we should talk about that. It's impressive. You not only have such in a short amount of time so many things out in the world, but you have so many things coming up. So do you want to talk about what's coming up next? I mean, you have a trilogy.
Yeah, yeah. So I have a trilogy of books coming out with Titan Books, and the first installment of that trilogy is coming out actually later this year, September 9th. It's called We Are Always Tender with Our Dead, and it's the first book of this three-book series called Burnt Sparrow. It's set in this fictional town in New Hampshire, and it's about this horrific tragedy that occurs on Christmas Day in 2003, and kind of the aftermath of that massacre and how it kind of lingers in the town for many years after the fact, and you know, the lives that it touches and the people, how they change over like the course of 30 years because of this one event. So I've got that coming out, and we're kind of like figuring out how we're gonna structure the releases for that, but I'm hoping we can kind of do it like one book every autumn. So like every fall, a new book will come out for Burnt Sparrow.
That's cool.
And then in 2026 or 2027, I have a book with Saga Press coming out that is called Wretch. And that book is also about grief, also about, you know, suffering and the addiction of clinging on to like loved ones and really trying to keep people alive and really like haunting the dead more than the dead haunt the living.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
That's
So I'm
good.
excited. I'm excited. I feel like, you know, I've got a lot of really amazing editors that I've worked with, and I'm really happy to be working with Saga Press now, and really excited to continue working with Titan, and you know, it's been great partnership so far.
Congratulations on all of it.
Thank you.
Before we kind of segue over, if anybody has questions, think about them now. I'll get to you in a minute. Well, like who's some of your inspirations? Whether you're talking inspires you now, but also like who did you grow up with reading? What I mean, we know Clive Barker.
Yeah.
But are there other authors that sort of are your canon, your own personal canon?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, Clive Barker is like number one. He's just such an amazing force, such an amazing talent. You know, like I said, like I kind of started, you know, going through like the canon of horror from like the early, you know, maybe like I started with like Poe and Hawthorne.
Oh yeah.
But then like I graduated to like the Splatterpunks, and that's really where I found like my true love.
Nice.
And so, you know, reading Clive Barker, and then like Poppy Z. Bright.
Yep.
Kathy Koja.
Sure.
David J. Shaw, just like the icons of like the Splatterpunk movement.
Yeah.
And you know, even outside of that too, like Dennis Cooper is another favorite of mine. You know, and then I feel like there are so many amazing contemporary horror fiction writers.
Yeah, we were talking about Haley Piper.
Yeah, Haley Piper, Alison Rumfitt.
Sure.
Gretchen Felker Martin.
Sure.
David Demchuk. I mean, there are so many like contemporary queer horror authors that are doing like amazing boundary pushing material now, and
out there in the public consciousness, like not in a way where like you know, I feel like maybe growing up like Splatterpunk stuff was not necessarily public knowledge, but you know, bookstores weren't going to be like, here's our section for, you know, but I mean, now I feel like the horror is having a moment, and these authors are getting to share in that moment more than they, you know, maybe we would have seen in the 80s.
I agree. I feel like, you know, it used to be something that was really kind of like forbidden
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, and it still is forbidden in some ways.
Sure.
But you know, it's interesting how the genre has kind of evolved, and I think it was like Dario Argento who said that like horror just like sheds its skin constantly
Yeah.
and really evolves. And I feel like horror does that so beautifully in a lot of ways, like just constantly mutating and becoming something
Yeah.
else.
Yeah, and many faces. It's not just one thing.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to feel like it's a singular vision of horror, but it has so many ways of sharing itself.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. Good deal. Does anyone have any questions? Hi, Clay.
Yes. Yeah, I'm obviously a big fan of Daniel Kraus. Clay had asked the book is dedicated to Daniel Kraus and like specifically why. Daniel Kraus, for those of you who don't know, is an amazing like New York Times bestselling author, and he has been a very big supporter of my work throughout my career so far. But more specifically, he read my very first novel, Everything the Darkness Eats, and he does this thing where he does like a wrap up every year with like his favorite books, and Everything the Darkness Eats was on that list. And that honestly, that book was not received the way I wanted it to be received. Obviously, like you can't control how a book is received by the public, but to have someone of his caliber endorsing me and putting his name like against my work and really supporting me that way, it really touched me in a lot of ways, and it felt like an honorable thing to just dedicate my second book to him. I just feel like I owe a lot to him just for doing that and being so kind and generous with his time too. He's a really great person and very sweet, just a really
Very
nice
sweet.
guy.
Yeah.
Very generous with his time, and I want to honor these people that have meant so much to me for so long, and just dedicating a book to him felt like the least I could do based on everything he's done for me.
Yeah, Daniel Kraus, we were talking a little bit about being online and negativity online. You don't control responses.
Yeah.
My first time I met Daniel Kraus was at a San Diego Comic-Con. It was, I feel like the last day, and I was heading into the con and he was heading out. And he spotted me and called my name, and we like met there for a moment and sat there chatting for the longest time. And one of the pieces of advice was like, kind of like, unsummoned. He's just like, you have to just like tune it all out.
Yeah.
He's like, it wasn't even something I was asking him. He was just talking about his experience online and being, who he was, connecting with the books he was writing and stuff he was doing with Guillermo del Toro at the time. He's like, you just have to shut all the noise out. And he's like, actually, I'm going to take like a sabbatical from online for a while to sort of be, quiet my mind of that stuff. And I was like, it was just good advice, and it was a nice moment. He is really a great guy and a great writer.
He's a very sweet man.
All right, other questions?
I have a microphone.
Oh, you have a microphone.
Yeah.
Oh,
Feel very powerful.
you wouldn't
with
be
it.
heard.
Well, I don't know if that's good or not.
It's good.
Eric, I love the story, The Trees Grew Because I Bled There.
Thank you.
I read that story and I had to sit with it for several days. And
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask you about the inspiration for that story, and because it's just the sheer and total pain, but yet love in that story. I mean, it is, if you've never read it, it is a doozy
Thank
of a
you.
story. But it's just touched me in a way that I hadn't been by like any kind of horror writer in a long time.
Thank
So
you.
just wondering, where did that come from? Because that was just, it was an amazing story.
Thank you so much. That's one of my favorite pieces from that collection, and I'm very proud of that story in particular. And I remember writing that story. It was one of the first pieces I wrote when I was first falling in love with my boyfriend, who's here tonight, and just has been like such an amazing support system for me, and just like a rock. And to write a piece about love and what we do to offer ourselves completely to someone else, it felt very appropriate. And that's really what I was thinking about a lot when I was, first falling in love with him. And yeah, that story was very, very raw and very personal to write. Same with Bodies Are for Burning in that story collection. That was a very like personal story about like intrusive thoughts and dealing with these intrusive thoughts and whatnot. But yeah, that story definitely stemmed from a place of love, even though I feel like it might be construed as like a more mean-spirited piece. I'm really glad that you picked up on like the love and the care that's in there, because I feel like there is like a lot of like what you've said, like there is like empathy in some of my pieces, and
Very, very seriously, yeah.
yeah, so I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Hi.
Hi.
So this is going to be a very specific question. You mentioned that your upcoming trilogy is set in New Hampshire. Caught my interest. I'm from New Hampshire.
Oh,
Usually
cool.
when you say New Hampshire, people go, "What's that?"
Right.
How did you pick New Hampshire out of all, like, why?
Oh, I lived in New Hampshire.
Oh, cool. Okay,
Yeah,
well, that
y-
explains. 'Cause
yeah,
I noticed
my-
it popped up in your writing before, and that doesn't usually happen either.
Right.
So-
Yeah. No. I right after undergrad, my parents and I moved to a town right outside of Portsmouth, New Hampshire. So we lived there for a bit, and then I moved eventually to Boston for grad school, and now I live there with my partner. But yeah, I love New Hampshire and think it's a great place and just like beautiful, and yeah. So thanks.
Hey, how you guys doing?
Hi.
Quick story really quickly. I think I was in like 5th or 6th grade. First time I had a creative writing assignment, and my teacher said basically, this one part is really good. And that like crushed me from them. I didn't realize it then. But the question I have for actually both you guys is, when did you stop being so precious about your writing? Like, when were you able to start to share it with other people and receive criticism and all that stuff?
That's a good question. I think I've always been really just like eager to know what other people think of my work, and I've always been really just interested in having a conversation with other people about like art and creation in general. So for me, it's probably not the answer you want to hear, but like it was very easy for me to just like not be precious about what I'm creating and realize that art is like a fluid process, and it's never just one thing, and it can change and evolve over time. And even work that's published can go out of print and can be revised and can be put back into print. So like nothing is ever forever. Nothing's ever completely permanent. That's kind of how I viewed art and writing like ever since I was really little.
Yeah, that's a very evolved. You're very lucky. I'm sure most people are like, no, it's all precious and perfect. Don't touch me. Don't talk to me. Before I really started to do novels, like I always refer to myself as a failed novelist because I have more failed material in my life than I do probably success. And while trying to be a novelist and failing at that, I did freelance writing for game industry. Pen and paper game industry, not video game industry. And so that's a pretty brutal industry. The editors there are not what I would refer to as necessarily kind or well-trained in kindness. They don't have a good bedside manner. And so just needing to pay bills and writing this kind of never-ending freelance kind of absolved me of having any preciousness because it was killed. It was stamped out of me, mostly in a good way. But later I started to reclaim a little preciousness, like as a treat. And kind of talking with Eric about sort of vision and what matters for a book and finding out how things align to a vision. I do think it becomes important then to sort of be the writer who figures out when things don't align with the vision. And so there's that dueling problem of like trying to figure out how to kill your darlings, as they say, but then also learning what hills you're willing to die on. Like what pieces of this book are yours. They're essential to the vision. They're the things that make you happiest. They're why you came to the page. And if someone wants to take that away, even if that's the quote-unquote right thing to do, not that there is a right thing to do because art is obviously very subjective, I do feel like those are the things you fight for. For better or for worse, those are the things you fight for. So most of the preciousness falls away, but I think you do need to maintain a few precious gems of your own. Anybody else got questions?
Oh, thank you. This is so great. This is another question that's for both of you, actually. When you're writing, and I'm a writer, and what happens to me is I think I'm plotting, and then suddenly it goes left turn at Albuquerque, right? So when you're going back and revising, or when you're writing, how often are you surprised? And what do you do with those surprises? Do you stick to the original vision, or are you more fluid and go, well, maybe this is the story I've been meaning to tell instead of the one I thought I was going to tell? And then one last question for you, Eric. Is it Wretch with a W or with an R?
With a W.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. I love those surprises, those moments where, it's like shocking, but it's also like, maybe this is what I wanted to write. Like, I feel like you put your subconscious like into the story, and like, it comes out in different ways, and it is surprising in a lot of ways. And I feel like those moments are really precious, and I definitely think about like honoring them, and making sure that like I'm following my muse, but also like being true to like my vision. I don't know. I feel like those moments are great, and I'm very fluid with the process. Like, even though I have the outline that I really love, like I love the outline process, like I'm not committed to it entirely. There have been moments where, like, even my book with Saga that's coming out next year or the year after, like the ending for that there was an element to the ending that was missing in the original outline, and I kind of added it at a later point. But I had left myself an out early on in the manuscript to like thread it through. And it was like, wow, like my subconscious did that without me even realizing it. So yeah, those moments are really special, I feel like.
Yeah, they're really key. I think, if a book is surprising you as you're writing it, then I think that's the best tell that it's going to surprise a reader. So I always say follow those things. And if it doesn't work later, you can always edit it. The joy of editing is like a book doesn't have to be done until it's done. I don't outline anymore. I used to outline religiously, and some part of me shifted, and I don't do that anymore. For better or for worse, I don't do that anymore. But even still, I have ideas in my head about how a thing's going to go, even as I'm writing a scene, and sometimes a character will say something or do something. And it's not that I think that storytelling is precisely magic in the literal sense of like I am being a receiver for divine intervention. But the subconscious is such a powerful force in that, and I think there's no reason not to kind of let it out when you can.
I have a question.
Ooh.
What authors, horror writers, that maybe are not on people's radar that you are really excited about?
Oh, that's a good one. I feel like Paula D. Ashe is really amazing. She has a collection novella piece called We Are Here to Hurt Each Other, which was, I believe, nominated for a Stoker and the Shirley Jackson Award. Joe Koch is an amazing writer. He has a collection called Convulsive that is really, really brilliant. David Demchuk I mentioned. I feel like he is very, very underappreciated. He's written a few novels like The Bone Mother and Red X. Who are you thinking of?
Delilah Dawson wrote a wonderful novella called Bloom, which I think is great. A writer who I don't think has ever gotten the plaudits he deserves is John Horner Jacobs. He's really just a power. I mean, he knows what he's doing in ways that I'm like he's the type where I read his books and I'm like, I should stop. Like I will never be this good, and I should 100% stop. There's a lot of great middle grade horror out there. Ali Malinenko, I just got an arc of Broken Dolls, and again another book that deals with grief, but also with the guilt that comes in and around that grief. And I feel like, while it's a very different book, there's just kind of some ties to what happens in Loathsome. So Laura Senf, too, another middle grade author who's now branching out and doing some young adult, and I think also has an adult coming. So those are all good places too. Oh, and Keith Rawson's Fever House just kicked me in the face. And obviously the sequel too, but like that first book I really love reading, like what we were talking about when I read Haley Piper's No Gods for Drowning, which is unfortunately not currently available. I don't believe. Hopefully it will return and find a publisher. One of my favorite things is just getting a book and I don't know what is in it, like literally from not a wit of concept. And I read that book, and No Gods for Drowning just shook me and blew me away, and I didn't know what it was, and the surprise of it was just such a joy. And then the execution of how well that surprise happened. And Keith Rawson's Fever House felt the same way. I did not know what it was. I was asked to blurb it, and I didn't get around to it because of time. And then at one point I just picked it up because I was like, I have a moment to just try something. And I know a book is going to be great when I'm like, I only have a few minutes to read, and then I'm getting like a phone call, be like, "You're due somewhere," and I'm like, "Oh, but I'm like reading. I can't leave the book, or the book will be sad."
This has been a great talk. I'm not a horror fan. My friend invited me here, so it's very exciting.
She dragged you here.
She invited me. I
Yeah,
said, yeah,
enjoy your nightmares.
Being around you two, it sounds like, yeah. But I did do a production of History of the Devil by Clive Barker.
Yes. I'm
In Tampa.
obsessed with that play.
It's crazy. But the question I had, sort of following up on this, what are you guys' influences outside of horror, and what kind of other art are you in communion with, or where else do you like draw inspiration from?
That's a good question. I read a lot outside of horror, to be honest. Like, I love literary fiction. I read recently a novella called The Stepdaughter, which was really brilliant. Kind of like this mean-spirited, vicious little novella, but not horror, but kind of like just dark. I love literary fiction. I love art just in general, like surreal, kind of weird art. I'm also a big music lover. I love anything like broody, like electronic, stuff like that. So I definitely find like inspiration from a bunch of other places like outside of horror, and I feel like that's important for genre writers, is to not read solely or watch only the genre in which you're writing. Like, you really need to expand and communicate with other genres and appreciate other types of art as much as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do all of the things of television, and my kid loves video games, and I love video games, and we play those. But for me, in terms of reading things, nonfiction is just a huge well of inspiration for me. I find that when I read a novel, I'm getting the novelist's ideas, which is the point, obviously. But when I read nonfiction, I feel like I'm coming up with ideas that are kind of growing out of the seedbed of that nonfiction. A great one I read recently, Chris Brown's, I might get this name wrong, A Brief History of Empty Lots, which is about him. He's in Austin, Texas, and he's finding nature and ecology and examining the environments of like parking lots and fence rows, places that are suburban or urban, and finding out what kind of creatures are there, plant life is there, and how are they interacting with each other, how are people affecting them, and how are these things affecting people. And it's a very simple, almost meditative book. It doesn't feel like it's overwritten or particularly academic. I found it completely fascinating. Rebecca Solnit has a book that it's been out for a number of years, but I found it in Amsterdam at an English language bookstore about getting lost. And it completely informed what I did with Staircase in the Woods, novel I have coming up. It very much about getting lost, and it's just so poetic in the way she writes it, this sort of recursive returning to themes and the color blue. It's a wonderful book. So nonfiction to me is just a place that I can always go to ground with.
Hi, Eric.
Hi.
Do you ever feel that being labeled a horror to a genre is limiting it all? And I ask that because sometimes I'll talk to people about reading a horror and they say, well, I don't read horror, So how do you
I always get
feel about
sad
that.
when I hear that because I feel
Yes.
like those readers are like the perfect horror readers because it's like, you know, maybe they're frightened or they're scared, and it's like you're my ideal reader. Like you're someone that I can affect. You're someone that I could like really disturb, and
I
like,
can break you.
I can break you.
I can break you.
Yeah. So like I want those people. Like I want them to read like our stuff. I don't know. I don't know if it's like limiting in a lot of ways. I hope it isn't. I don't know how you feel, but
I mean, yeah, I don't think it's limiting in the sense that I guess if the audience that wants it finds it, that's the goal, right?
right.
But I do like it when you break out of a thing and people are like, I read this and I didn't either mean to or didn't expect to,
Right.
and I didn't know it was horror or whatever it was, and they're like, no, I really like it. And if there's that introduction that happens,
Right.
that's
Yeah.
cool.
And I'm interested in like being like I'm cool with being that for people, like being that introductory thing that maybe they're like, oh, look,
Yeah.
I'll try this out and
Yeah.
like see if they like it or not, you know.
Well, and I also think too, sometimes people are like, well, have you ever read any of the, Song of Ice and Fire, the Game of Thrones books? And they're
Right.
like, yeah. And you're like, well, then you've read horror.
Then
I
you've
don't know
read
what to tell you.
horror.
Like,
Yeah.
there's so, I mean, horror is an emotion as much as it is a genre, and it's in so much of what you can
It's
possibly
in
read.
everything.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
Even like
so-
The Lovely Bones is horror. I feel like.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think we're at time.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Eric.
everyone. This was great.